have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker. You've all known him for a number of years because, as you've already heard, Dr. Duckworth has been a fierce advocate for this agency for a long time. He's been a champion for many reasons. I want to tell you a little bit about his official resume because it is very impressive. He serves as the medical director and chief medical officer for NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Health. He recently authored NAMI's first book, You Are Not Alone, the NAMI Guide to Navigating Mental Health. Written and, of course, with authority and compassion, this is the essential resource for individuals and families seeking expert guidance on diagnosis, treatment, and recovery, featuring inspiring true stories from real people just like us, in their own words, folks. Dr. Duckworth is a double board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology in adult, child, and adolescent psychiatry, and has extensive experience in the public health arena. He's on the teaching faculty at Harvard Medical School and the Boston University School of Public Health. He has served, as we said, as acting commissioner of mental health for the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health and as a board member of the American Association of Community Psychiatrists. And as Jean mentioned a little earlier, and I alluded to, Dr. Duckworth is an alum of this very organization, having served as Vinfen's medical director from 2005 to 2011. He has done more for this organization than we'll ever be able to thank him for. So as we bring him up, let's not just welcome Dr. Duckworth, please let's thank him. Ladies and gentlemen, my honor to present Dr. Ken Duckworth.
Hello, everybody. It's Alumni Day here at Vinfen. I was trying to think of the things that I have, so many happy memories of my 6 years as Vinfen's medical director. How many of you know Mary McGinnis? I hired her. How many of you know Fabulous Ted from the Assertive Community Treatment Team in Lawrence? Hired him, too. How many of you think Alicia Powell is the bee's knees? Hired her, too. Yeah. So what I tried to do in creating, I tried to attract wonderful people to Vinfen, and every single one of them had a heart of gold and was totally devoted to this work. So I don't want to say all the people that I worked with because I'll forget somebody, but it's a great joy to be back. I know how compelling this work is. I know how challenging it is. I think Vinfen's a wonderful organization, and I'm very honored that you invited me back. So I just want to say thank you. All right, I think you're all going to get a copy of the book without paying for it, which is the best way to get a copy of the book. So the National Alliance on Mental Illness, a quick show of hands. How many of you have been to a NAMI walk? All right, very good. How many of you have been to a NAMI class? All right, smaller number, but not zero. So the National Alliance on Mental Illness is the largest mental health organization of people with mental health conditions and their families in the country, ergo the world. I get an email every month from somebody in Malaysia or Ireland or Taiwan who says, could you start a NAMI there? And what I always say is, we have enough trouble running our own, nonprofit organization with 700 affiliates all across the country run by volunteers. NAMI's doing great, but, it's not going to go international. So as their doctor, I felt that they should have a book. And I wanted the book to be real people who use their names and share what they had learned. This was really a gap that I saw in the literature. So when I go to the bookstore, you see a lot of books by psychiatrists like me who have all the answers. And I grew up with a dad that had very bad bipolar disorder, and I became a psychiatrist to help him and to understand this thing that we couldn't talk about in our lives. That's my little journey. So I don't think I ever told people at Vinfen who recruited me, I never took calculus. And I wasn't a STEM kid. I never succeeded at the 5th grade, science fair volcano thing. I was more interested in what illnesses meant to people, how families and individuals worked together. I was an unusual medical student in that regard. But it turns out there's 11 medical schools that don't require calculus. And I got into 9 of them. So the moral of the story is nobody's ever come to me with a differential equation request or complex multiple fractions. So I was a very unusual person to become a psychiatrist, but I was very interested in the family experience of living with a person who was a wonderful person with a very serious illness and a very bad illness. And so when I would go to the bookstore, I'd see all these books by doctors that were all about the doctor knew things, and then it would say, anybody I discussed in this book is not a real person. In order to protect their privacy, I've made them a composite of several people that I've met, somebody I saw on the bus stop, and one of my distant cousins. And I used to think to myself, isn't that interesting? Because in working at Vinfen and working at NAMI, I met so many people who had learned things. And this was this gigantic font of untapped wisdom. Real people. If you've lived with schizophrenia for 20 years, you've probably learned something about living with schizophrenia. If you've loved somebody with bipolar disorder, you've probably learned a little bit about communication, about advocacy, about battling for housing. So to me, this is the book I always wanted to write. I went to the class, Harvard runs a class called Writing for Medical Professionals. I went 4 years in a row. I was the single worst student in the entire class. So I went the first year and I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have a book where real people share their stories? And there's about 800 people in the room. And I thought, there's absolutely no way I'm going to pull this off. The next year I went, and there was a dermatologist talking about zits. And his book had become like a bestseller. And I'm like, this is absolutely ridiculous. I don't think I know how to write a book, but I'm coming back, and I'm going to figure this out. The third year that I went, a guy from the MIT press says, haven't you been here 3 years in a row? And I said, yes, I'm the single worst student in the history of this class because I don't know how to pull this off. But I have a kernel of an idea. And to make a long story short, the fourth year I began to rough it out. And then the next year, COVID happened. And all of a sudden, CNN wanted to talk about mental health, what helps people communicate, how do you deal with isolation. And I had this little light bulb. I've been sitting on this one idea. I only have one idea. I want to emphasize this. One idea, one book. So I'm a one for one. I'm a one-hit wonder. Spotify has a fabulous one-hit wonder playlist. It's one of my favorite playlists now because I'm a one-hit wonder. I have no intention of writing another book, I have to tell you. But a young mentee of mine is writing a book for parents, a guide for parents with children with serious emotional illnesses, emotional disturbance, teenagers and young adults. Her name is Christine Crawford. She's at Boston Medical Center, and that book will be out in a year. So she didn't work at Vinfen, but she's pretty awesome, right? So she has a lot of the positive. So I just want you to know that I found 130 people who wanted to share what they had learned. All of them used their names. Because my observation was that shame and isolation are still big problems in our line of work. I know it's getting better, and I know COVID made mental health a we thing, not a you thing, right? People are more willing to talk about this idea than ever before of what it's like. So do any of you remember Studs Terkel? Any of you have gray hair? So if you have gray hair, he was my inspiration. Any of you folks know Humans of New York? Yes. Okay, so Humans of New York is the same idea. Real people talking about their experience of living in New York. Studs Terkel interviewed people about, for instance, his best-selling book was about their experience of working. And I remember reading that book, and I was thinking, this is like the coolest thing ever. Why isn't there that for mental health? And so that idea had bounced around with me for many years. And really, I've been working on this idea for 15 years. And then when COVID happened, I realized that we could pull this off. So in addition to first-person and family experience, I interviewed 130 people from 38 states. They identified themselves with 11 different races and ethnicities across the spectrums of gender and sexuality, 25 different religions, 50 occupations. The goal in doing it this way was I wanted people to realize that no matter what you were going through, there was someone like you in America who was dealing with a mental health condition. So that was the goal of the book. So it's kind of wide, but the people I met were absolutely incredible, and some of their stories are quite compelling. So in addition to that, I interviewed 130 people, but I somehow managed to interview 80 family members and 80 people with first-person lived experience. So how do you do that math? Well, a lot of people said, I live with bipolar disorder, and my spouse, my child, my brother has this other condition. So you're both a peer and a family member. The book, like Vinfen, is very integration-oriented. So it's the first-person peers, how to become a peer specialist, what did peers do for you, how did you learn from peers, and it's very family-integrated into the stories, and that families share what they have learned. Many people feel that they were in both camps. Now, technically, I am a doctor, even though I think like a regular person, still to my core. And so when at the back of the book, I asked all the famous researchers in the country to answer all the common questions that I get. So who cares what Ken Duckworth thinks? Do I really have to take these meds forever? Why don't we go to the king of bipolar disorder for planet Earth and have him answer it? How do you talk to somebody in your family who doesn't want help? Well, I went to the man who invented motivational interviewing. And he was so honored to be in this book. What is the Wellness Recovery Action Plan? Why, ask Mary Ellen Copeland. How did you discuss it? How did you describe it? How did you create it? And so the idea of the book is to be a practical guide rooted in real people just like us. Back to the first poem, actually. Back to the first poem. The first poem sounded a lot like this. So I want to leave you with a couple of stories from the book. I just want to tell you a few stories, and then I can take a few questions, I think. A couple of stories from the book. I'm going to talk from the peer perspective. There was a woman who was in her 40s and had decided she was going to end her life. She was homeless and living out of her car. She was in a hospital, and she was forced by the social worker at the hospital, to attend one more group. She had told no one her plans. And the group that she attended, she rolls her eyes. She's like, my God, I've been to so many hospitals. I could run this dumb group, right? And she didn't tell anybody her plans. The group was a NAMI in our own voice presentation. What did she meet? She met a woman just like her who had lost everything. And she made a decision to keep going in her life. That same person was later arrested when she had a manic episode, was in the correctional setting. And the corrections officer, when she finished her sentence, drove her to the shelter where she was still homeless, unhoused, and said to her, Kimberly, I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon. Terrible thing for a professional to say. She then tells me that she becomes a crisis intervention trainer and de-escalation for correctional workers, is in a room like this, and spots that guy in the back of the room. And so her story ends with, Ken, it was pretty sweet, I'm not going to lie. He was right. We did see each other again. We did see each other again, but it was not in the way that he thought. That's a good example of the kind of stories that I just found randomly. I did not, I don't have ringers in the book. I would give a talk to NAMI, Connecticut, NAMI, Wisconsin, NAMI, Georgia, and I say, anybody want to be in the book? Think about it. You have to use your names. Talk to your family. Are you up for using your names? Do you want to just share what you're doing? Because it's semi-groundbreaking what we're taking on, the idea that you're a real person and that you are also an expert. So Kimberly was one great story. I also have a chapter on family communication and a chapter on family advocacy. And I have a feeling a lot of you could have been in that chapter, on families communication and family advocacy. And these were things that I didn't figure out in my own family. And so through my travels at Vinfen, at NAMI, and other places, I found all these amazing families that learn how to communicate, problem solve, become advocates. And so I just really want to acknowledge that, I think when you look at the book, you may find things just like what you've done, things that my family never really figured out. And that's the reason that I went to medical school and I did the whole thing, even though I had no STEM skills or math skills or actually interest in science at all. I was really interested in just helping my dad. It was very like a simple advocacy program. So anybody who hired me at Vinfen in 2005, if I should fully admit, I know nothing about calculus, was not a strong science student. I did enough science to get into medical school, and then I abandoned all interest in science. I wanted to go right back to what helped people, what made a difference for people, what this all meant to us. So let me stop by just saying it's a great honor to be here at Vinfen. This is an amazing organization. The people who work at Vinfen are remarkable. Some of them are very long-term people. You know who they are. There are people who've been here for 25 years, 20 years, 15 years, and they do it because of the remarkable mission and the culture that has been created here at Vinfen. So I want to make sure I get to take a couple questions from you. before I stop, but mostly I just want to say thank you for having me, and thank you for all you do. I think we have time for a couple of questions. Anybody have a question? Anybody that I hired have a question? These would be the ringers in the audience.
I have a question.
Yes, Susan.
I have a question.
Yes, you look fabulous, by the way, Susan. I think
He's the only one here with a good picture.
an accurate picture.
Well,
I was thinking like last week, right? Not my bar mitzvah. Yeah.
when did you know you had a calling, Dr. Duckworth?
All right, so, life happens the way it happens. So I'm an 8-year-old kid in the basement building a fort with blankets under books, like I think every other child in America has. And I heard a great disturbance upstairs, and I walked up the stairs to see my dad being pulled away by the police. This is in Philadelphia. My family's from Philadelphia for multiple generations. And then he disappears for a few months, and I'm 8. Nobody talks about it. Again, I want to emphasize this. Nobody talks about it. Then we're in a U-Haul driving to Michigan in the snow. And 8-year-old me is like, does this thing have something to do with that thing? Because nobody talked about it. And I'm like, what is a force that is so powerful that you can't talk about it, but it could move a family 350 miles where we knew no one? So it turns out I go to Michigan. I like college football. I'm still a polite driver. I like public schools. I'm a nice person. Like, this is Midwestern stuff has stuck on me. But I came back to the East Coast because I really belong on the East Coast. And I made a decision with no actual, capacity in the STEM world that I was just going to become a doctor to help my dad because nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody could problem solve it. And I just said, well, this is just going to be my life work. So I feel very grateful to have stumbled upon that. Like many things, it comes to you in your life experience, right? So I majored in history, and I went to the place at the University of Michigan, the Career Counseling Center, and I said, can I go to medical school without doing any science? And he said, not exactly. He said, but there's 11 medical schools that don't require science. Okay, thank you. So, it's been a great career. My years at Vinfen were really quite wonderful, as part of the experience of it all. And, I did find a kind of calling, Susan, in this unfortunate little aspect of my life. My father and I figured out that you could have a loving relationship and become great friends even if you couldn't talk about it. And that always stuck with me. So here I am at the medical school. I'm working at Harvard. I'm teaching, blah, blah, blah. I'm learning from all these famous people. And, nobody ever taught me, that you could have a great relationship. I had already learned that in my own life. And then working at Vinfen, I saw people are learning things that I hadn't been taught about. How dogs help people. How becoming a peer makes a difference. How family communication can happen. And none of those things were happening in my training. So anyway, a long answer, Susan.
No, it's a great answer. But did you and your father ever talk about it?
Yes, incredibly. This sounds like a Lifetime movie. I know it's really bad, but I don't really talk about this, but you asked. So my dad's on his deathbed. He's 87 years old. We never talked about it. I want to emphasize this. Throughout my entire time becoming a psychiatrist, he would call me and say, how's the operating room going? I'm like, Dad, I'm a psychiatrist. We don't do that. And by the way, I don't drive a BMW. Haven't you seen? I drive, a Toyota, right? I don't have, the surgeons have BMWs. This is the way it works. The cardiologists, very Audis. It's very straightforward, actually. The hierarchy of medicine is right there. The negative attitudes towards people with mental health conditions are reflected in how psychiatrists were viewed, right? So anyway, so he'd say, how's the operating room? The entire time, we never talked about it one time. I want to emphasize this. I won a dinky little award at NAMI in 1999. My mother attended the convention to see me get the award, and I said, Mom, it was a room about 5x the size of this. I said, Mom, there are so many families just like you. There are so many wonderful people that you could talk to, and you would not have to be alone. And she said, I think Chicago is known for its deep dish pizza. Not making that up. Why don't we take your award and go have some? The Pizzeria Uno, which was a new idea then. I want to emphasize, this is the world was made of rock. My father's dying, and I don't really, this is not part of my remarks, but you asked. My father's dying, and I say, Dad, I'm going to go back to Boston now. He was back in Philadelphia. The family moved back to their roots. The thing in Michigan only really took for me in terms of college football and polite driving. Like, they didn't like it there, and they moved back later. And he said, I'm really sorry about all those hard times. Now, that's kind of an understatement for a person who had police at the door, drooling, terrifying moments, psychosis, communicating with the microwave. I mean, we're talking about the full Monty. It was the most understated apology of all time, and it meant everything to me. Everything, because he had some recognition of what I had tried to do. We had this most incredible moment. Then I flew back to Boston, young kids at the time. And my sister calls me and said, you going to come back and see Dad? I'm like, what, are you kidding? Well, he's throwing sandwiches at the nurses today. I'm like, that's not happening. We hit a grand slam walk-off home run together, and I'm done. Like, I'm not going to be there when he dies. We're done. We had the most perfect thing. So anyway, I wasn't there when he died because I didn't want to go back because we had a perfect moment together. So I think, my family really loved me and was very kind to me. I was never mistreated. They would be behind this book. They would have made this pivot. I know they would have. And I lost my siblings to cancer over the last 10 years. But they were kind of like spirit animals within me, helping me. How would Joe make this better? How would Sue improve it? So this was kind of a bereavement project for me in a way, because I had lost all the members of my original family. But I felt like they wanted this from me. So it's a complicated answer. But my dad didn't say, hey, are you going to write a book about this someday? I didn't know. I wasn't there yet. I hadn't had the idea. But I feel quite certain that, he's looking down and saying, you became a USA Today bestseller? You weren't even good at math. Right? I just know he's saying that. Like, how did you do that? Anyway.
Well, may I just say, you have a family at Vinfen, Dr.
That's
Duckworth.
true.
This is your family.
My extended family, yes.
Absolutely. Let's hear it one more time for the doctor. No, don't go anywhere. Wait. We are, after all, presenting you with the Educator of the Year award because the Educator of the Year is somebody who helps explain, help, guide, and do all the things that you do and that you have always done, that you are continuing to do through your book.
Thank you.
We are not alone.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the award,
Look at that.
look at this. This is actually, show everybody, because this is done by artists.
Oh, no, that's the next one.
What? I have the wrong one?
No, that's yours.
Oh, we have two things for you.
Wait,
We
there's
have
more?
two things. There's more. There's a car.
No.
There's a BMW. It's parked right outside. You knew it was going to come to that. Exactly. Everybody's getting a book. We mentioned that. But this is the artwork that I wanted to tell you about. Yes, it's from one of our own artists. His name is John Grazer, and he's from the Atlantic Clubhouse. And is John here? No, John is not here.
Well, you'll give me John's address. I wanted to write him a love note. It's absolutely beautiful.
Show everybody.
And the thing that I do for my little mental health is I wander through the woods with my dog every day. So this is like perfect. It's a perfect present for me.
It's a good.
It's perfect.
Well, you are a present and a gift to all of us. So it's the least we could do for you. We'll leave it up here. Yes, Dr. Ken Duckworth. It was great. Great.